So the original plan was to try to make a $15 deck based on the Mycotyrant, as that was one of the challenges that Gravamy in my Discord decided to inquire about. Now, the problem though is that the criteria for the $15 decks are that the commander has to be $1 or less, and then the 99 of the deck can be $15 thereabouts, give or take some change. But I decided that since the Mycotyrant does not actually function within those parameters, he's $1.43 for one of the cheapest printings, I figured we would do a different challenge with him. Let's go ahead and make a deck that is closer to, say, $30. But we have to add in one extra spin. We can't just make a deck that is the Mycotyrant for $30. We need to push it one step further. This deck, due to the effect of the Mycotyrant being at the beginning of your end step, make funguses equal to the amount of times you've descended, this means we're going to have to build a deck with all permanents. No instants, no sorceries, only permanent cards. That way, there is a 100% chance that any time we draw a card, it will be something that the Mycotyrant can descend with. Let's go ahead and get into the deck build today. So, this particular deck is going to have a couple of jobs. It's going to need to be able to self-mill itself, and it's going to need to be able to do that fairly frequently. It's also going to need to be able to have win cons that involve putting our own cards in the graveyard. So, that would normally mean we would go with an aristocrat strategy. But we've got to go one step further. We need to be able to benefit from creatures hitting the graveyard from either our deck or the field. So, let's get into the ramp package and talk about how we're going to be doing that with today's deck. Starting with ramp, we have 10 ramp cards, and they all had to be permanents, so no rampant growths, none of that here. Let's go ahead and get into the deck choices. Beginning with Beanstalker Giant, turns out that even if we don't have access to instants or sorceries, we can use adventure cards to facilitate having an instant or sorcery in our deck. So we have a 3-mana Search Your Library for a basic land card and then put it onto the battlefield with the Beanstalk Giant, and of course we can play it as a creature later. Farhaven Elf and Wood Elves both give us land fetch like Rampant Growth, but Wood Elves is more like Nature's Lore in that it gives us a forest, so it can get our dual lands. Lana War Dead, Paradise Druid, Ornithopter of Paradise, and Intrepid Archaeologist, as well as an Elvish Mystic, round off our ability to have plenty of mana dorks, but the Intrepid Paleontologist actually does something a little bit better. So, normally, I would put an Honored Heirloom in a deck, but since Honored Heirloom costs 3 mana, and that's not the best rate of return when we are dealing with a commander like Mycotyrant, and we've got a bit more of a flexible budget, we are instead using the Intrepid Paleontologist. It is a 2-mana creature with only 2 lines of relevant text. We can tap it for a mana of any color, or exile a card from a graveyard at instant speed. Now, the reason this is a little better than Honored Heirloom is that we can use it for its own effect. We can tap it for a mana of any color, and then use that mana to exile a card from a graveyard, something that the Honored Heirloom cannot do. I would highly recommend running Intrepid Paleontologist as one of your mana dorks, as it does give you a lot of flexibility for the extra mana you spend into it. Wayfarer's Bauble can sack itself to get us a land out of the deck, and Arcane Signet rounds off the last mana rock of the deck, so every single way we have to ramp is a permanent of some variety. Now, that does lead us into the next issue. How do we draw cards without being able to play draw spells? Well, we have an 8-card draw package here, which is split evenly between this and a sack outlet package. So let's go ahead and go into the ramp cards, starting with Morbid Opportunist. If one or more other creatures die, we get to draw a card, and that happens every single turn. Death Reap Ritual is the exact same thing, but it happens at the beginning of the end step. Tenacious Underdog, if it's in the graveyard, we can cast it from the grave, since we'll be throwing it to the grave pretty quickly. And it has Blitz while it's in the grave, so we can cast it from grave for 4, and it will auto-sack itself, drawing us a card when it dies, triggering our other dies and dies triggers that we have in the deck. And then we have the Mossword Dread Knight. We can cast it as a sorcery to draw a card and lose life, and then if it dies as a creature, we can cast it again from the graveyard as an adventure spell later. This is the yin to Tenacious Underdog's yang. It's got the same mana cost across its abilities, and just honestly, I run both of these in Pioneer in my my green-black Golgari Rock deck, so this is already happy area for me to be able to run both of these here. Then we have Grim Haruspex and the Midnight Reaper. If a non-token creature dies, we can draw a card with both of these. Midnight Reaper makes us take damage for that as well. Then we have Moldervine Reclamation. Every time a creature of ours dies, we draw a card and we gain a life. And then we have Liliana's Standard Bearer. It's got Flash, and if it enters the battlefield, we can draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures that died under our control this turn. So because our commander, Mycotyrant, is a commander that creates a lot of tokens, this card will actually give us a lot of draw power with those tokens. Our opponent tries to board wipe us to stop us from getting a big enough board, and we suddenly say, no, I want Mycotyrant to hit you lots later, so we're going to draw like 15 cards. So, the other relevant part of the Mycotyrant's effect, the reason why we're doing this. Mycotyrant's power and toughness are each equal to the number of fungi and saplings we control, so our goal is to get a maximum number of fungi and saplings, so the Mycotyrant can kill people with commander damage if we can't kill them with burn damage first. So, Liliana's Standard Bearer is an insurance policy when all of our cards get wiped out. But how exactly are we throwing all of our cards to the graveyard? I mentioned the sack outlet area we'll get to later, but obviously we need something a little more good than that. There's a reason why I put so many cards that give incremental draw of 1 in the deck, and that is because we also have a dredge package. That's if you are a modern player, this deck does not have a Creeping Chill in it, but I know that some of you are probably already tired of that. Let's start with Shambling Shell. We can sack it to its own effect to put a 1/1 counter on target creature. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be another counter on the Mycotyrant, so we can Voltron somebody to death with it. But it's got Dredge 3, so if we were to draw a card, we can instead replace that instance of drawing with milling the top 3 cards of our deck and then putting the Shambling Shell back in our deck. So because the Shambling Shell sacrifices itself as a cost, for however much mana we have, the Shambling Shell will be in the graveyard, and cards like Morbid Opportunist, Death Reap Ritual, and Moldervine Reclamation will see it. In the event of a card like Moldervine Reclamation, Grim Haruspex, or Midnight Reaper that can trigger multiple times during a turn, we can play Shambling Shell for 3, and then we can dredge after sacking it, because we'll immediately have a draw trigger, and then instead of drawing a card with that trigger, we will just put Shambling Shell back in our hand and then play it on the board again, sacking it until we are out of mana, powering up our commander a crap ton, and then getting rid of 3 cards every single time we do that. So every 3 mana we have becomes a milling of 3. Then our commander will create Saprolings for all the cards we milled, and because our deck has a 100% rate of permanence in it, there are 54 creatures, 11 artifacts, 6 enchantments, and 35 lands. There are no non-permanent cards in the deck. Shambling Shell will always give you Saprolings and power to your commander. Then in the Dredge 4 category, we have Golgari Thug. If it dies, we can put a creature from our graveyard back on top of our library, and then, of course, we can dredge that away with Golgari Thug if we want to, or we can use this as a way to recur cards later in the game. Then we have Stinkweed Imp at Dredge 5. If it deals combat damage to any creature, we blow up that creature. It's mini Death Touch. Not quite as good, though, because it doesn't have the ability to use, like, a Viridian Longbow, but Stinkweed Imp can still prevent us from dying to a rabid dragon, while also being a wonderful dredge piece in the deck. And then finally, the boy to end all boys, the Golgari Grave Troll. It enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter for every single creature in our graveyard, of which we have 54 in our deck. And it's got Dredge 6, and another line of text that isn't super relevant to us, but sometimes matters. We can also remove a 1/1 counter from the Grave Troll to regenerate it. 99% of the time, we're not doing that. 99% of the time, we are just letting the Grave Troll die. And also, by the way, if you wanted to play this as a non-budget deck at all, you could also throw in a copy of the Ozolith, so that every time you kill your Grave Troll at, 20/20, 30/30, its counters never actually disappear. They just go on to the Ozolith and then move over to the commander for quick Voltron-y shenanigans. anytime we were to use one of our incremental draws like the Mosswood Dread Knight, the Tenacious Underdog, the Grim Haruspex, we would just replace that incremental draw with Golgari Grave Troll, dredging 6, giving us 6 Saprolings off our commander and getting us closer to winning the game. This card is nutso. If you have played against it in any 60-card format, you understand the absolute soul-crushing, ball-busting power that this guy holds in his ham. But we are milling ourselves out a lot, obviously. So how are we going to facilitate protecting ourselves from that? Well, there's a few cards we can use for it. In a non-budget deck, we can use an Eldrazi Titan, but in this version of the deck, we're going to focus on just one card, the Perpetual Timepiece. We can tap it to put 2 cards from our library in our graveyard, so it's another way to mill ourselves. And if we pay 2, we can exile it and shuffle any number of target cards from our graveyard into our library. This will be one of the ways we can make sure that we do not deck out during our game if we need to. It also functions as a mill piece on its own, which is just fantastic. But I mentioned the sack outlets, so let's go ahead and get into those real quick. Now that you know what our game plan is, we're going to Voltron our commander up, punch somebody in the face, and we're going to try to burn them to death with cards I'll talk about later. And we're going to use a lot of incremental draw to get us all the way through here. But let's go ahead and talk about the sack outlets we are choosing for the deck. Vampiric Rites can sack a creature to gain a life and draw a card. Of course, it's another way to get incremental draw. Viscera Seer can sack a creature to scry 1. Tarian's Journal can sack a creature to draw a card. Once again, incremental draw for the abilities. And we can flip it after discarding our hand, which will descend for every card we discarded, to give us a land that will reanimate creatures for the rest of the game. That is a wonderful payoff for Tarian's Journal. Then we have Woe Strider. It is a creature that creates a 0/1 goat when it comes onto the battlefield, and we can sack creatures to scry 1. We can also pay 5 to escape it from our graveyard, which is very important since we will be milling it to the graveyard pretty often. And then we have the Priest of Forgotten Gods. We can sack 2 other creatures, and any number of players will lose 2 life, and then they will sacrifice a creature as well. And then we get 2 black mana, and then we get to draw a card. Honestly, just a fantastic card with a great rate of return that nobody's going to let us keep on the board for more than a turn or 2. So, of course, we can't just rely on Dredge to get our cards to the graveyard, and we want to be able to get Dredge creatures into the graveyard fairly reliably. So we have one of a couple options. We can either put subpar Dredge cards in our deck so that we can increase the Dredge count, or we can put tutors in our deck to tutor for those Dredge cards. So let's go ahead and begin with our lovely Gravebreaker Lamia. Lifelink, 5 mana. When it ETB, search your library for any card, put it in the graveyard, and then spells you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. This will lower the blitz cost of our Tenacious Underdog, while also giving us the ability to throw any of our Dredge creatures and the aforementioned Underdog into the graveyard. And every time that we use one of these effects, we will also gain the ability to get another Saproling off of the Mycotyrant. Then we have Corpse Connoisseur, same thing, ETB, search your library for a creature, throw it into the graveyard, and then shuffle your library. It also has Unearth, so we can cast this from the grave and get more creatures to our grave. And then we have Violent Tumor, 4 mana. When it ETBs, throw any creature from our deck to the graveyard and then shuffle. It's also got Death Touch, so it can trade with any ground-running commanders and win those fights. And then we have the Auric Lore Mage. We can tap it to search our library for any card and then throw it into the graveyard. If it's an instant or sorcery, we put a 1/1 counter on the Auric Lore Mage. But of course, we're not going to be doing that because we are not playing any of those. The Auric Lore Mage is the repeatable way to keep activating our commander's ability and then slowly eking out the win. But we do have one other card to cover before we get to the other meats and potatoes of the deck, and that is the deck's lieutenant, the Ogre Slumlord. Anytime a non-token creature dies, we make a 1/1 black rat creature token, and rats you control have Death Touch. A lot of the cards in our deck will trigger this, giving us access to lots and lots of rat tokens if our commander cannot give us the saprolings that we oh so desire. The only downside of the Ogre Slumlord is it doesn't have the ability to generate tokens that give it power the same way the Mycotyrant does, so it's not going to be Voltroning anybody into the face anytime anytime soon, but it's still a very, very good substitute when our commander cannot keep its face on the board. Now, we also have the removal and interaction package, which is a 15-card deep package. A lot, but I think you'll understand why we have so many of the cards that we have chosen, beginning with Fleshbag Marauder, which of course enters the battlefield and sacrifices itself when it comes into the battlefield. So, well, it sacrifices any creature we have, but usually itself. Now, this means that we get a descend trigger every time we do the Fleshbag Marauder effect, or rather, we increase the descend count for our commander to see at the end of the turn. We also have Demon's Disciple and Merciless Executioner and Plaguecrafter, which are all doing the same thing in the deck, sacrificing themselves or other creatures to get this effect. Now, note, if you are trying to increase your Saproling count, do not sacrifice Saprolings to cards like Plaguecrafter, because tokens do not count towards descent. Descent reads specifically when a card touches a graveyard, not when a creature dies. That means that tokens are not seen because tokens do not leave the field as cards. Now, we also have Meteor Golem as a way to blow up any kind of non-land permanent that anybody has. Of course, the deck has Meteor Golem. We can ramp into it easily. We can reanimate it. We can throw it into the graveyard with a tutor, and we can then reanimate it from there. It's just a good card, okay? ETB, blow up anything, make Meteor Golem great. He's already amazing. Let's go. Then we have Reclamation Sage, 3 mana, blow up any artifact or enchantment on the board. Overseer of the Damned can blow up any creature and also create extra tokens for us, much like our boy the Ogre Slumlord can. Then we have Canker Bloom, which we can sacrifice to blow up any artifact, permanent, or we can proliferate in decks that care about that. And remember, this is a sack trigger so that we can activate our commander's ability. Ravenous Chupacabra will blow up any creature when it comes onto the board. Outland Liberator can sack itself, triggering our commander to blow up any artifact or enchantment. Dalek, Drone, Necron Deathmark, and Noxious Gearhulk all blow up a creature when they enter the battlefield and give us some extra effect. Noxious Gearhulk gives us life. Dalek Drone will cause a player to lose life. And Necron Deathmark is probably the most important one of all of these. Not only does it make a player mill 3 cards like us, triggering our commander, but also it has Flash, so we can actually cast this on our opponent's turns, even though we don't have access to instants or sorceries. Speaking of which, we also have the Murderous Rider. It is an instant on one end. It's a murder, destroying a creature or a planeswalker, and then we lose 2 life. And then if it dies, we can put it on the bottom of its owner's library. Another tiny, tiny bit of mill protection if we need it in a pinch. It's not going to stop us from other players milling us, but it can protect us in a pinch from having no cards in our deck. Then we have Savra, Queen of the Golgari. Anyway, Savra, Queen of the Golgari, anytime we sack a black creature, everybody has to sack a creature with us, and anytime we sack a green creature, we can gain 2 life. A little bit of incremental life gain, a little bit of making everybody lose cards. It is a wonderful creature, and it will do us very, very well. But let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to keep creatures on the board through this entire deck. Starting with a card that features Savra on the art, because of course I had to include it because I have a problem with Golgari Mommies, okay? Starting with Dreadbridge Chant in our 9-card deep reanimation and recursion package. Dreadbridge Chant enters the battlefield, putting the top 10 cards of our library into the graveyard, of course, giving us 10 Descents of the Mycotyrant. At the beginning of our upkeep, choose any card at random from the graveyard, and if it's a creature card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in our hand. Considering that the deck has 54 creatures, the odds are ever in our favor. Then we have Doomed Necromancer, which can sacrifice itself to put a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield, triggering our commander, of course. Body Launderer, anytime a non-token creature we control dies, the Body Launderer will connive, which of course lets us basically loot. We can draw a card, discard a card, and then if we discarded a non-land card, he gets a 1/1 counter. Now, this is super important. The 1/1 counters are good for him because when he dies, we can return a creature that is a non-rogue creature from our graveyard to the battlefield again, which can help us with getting, like, we can get a Doom Necromancer out and then use Doom Necromancer to get back Body Launderer. That's just a thing you have access to, so don't forget you have access to that. But outside of that, every time you connive and throw something to the graveyard, that counts as descending for our commander's effect. So every card in this deck, for the most part, can trigger our commander's effect. Then we have Vat of Rebirth and Altar of Baal. lovely reanimation cards that allow us to constantly reanimate stuff. Altar of Ball, exile a creature we control to take a creature from our graveyard, put it onto the battlefield. We're, of course, going to use that to get rid of a Saproling token to reanimate something important. And then Vat of Rebirth, every time one of our creatures dies, we can go ahead and put an oil counter on the Vat. And then when the Vat has 4 oil counters, we can pay 3 and tap it and summon any creature from our graveyard at sorcery speed. It is a fantastic card for 1 mana. Run it in more Reanimator decks. Speaking of fantastic cards, Whisper Blood Liturgist. We can sack 2 creatures, of course giving us 2 triggers of our commander, in order to get any creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Now, oftentimes this won't trigger our commander because we're going to sack Saprolings to it, but it is still an absolutely fantastic card. But because our commander really wants creatures touching the grave repeatedly, what's a repeatable creature we can play that will constantly give us access to his effect late in the game? Reassembling Skeleton. 2 mana for a 1/1, and whenever you pay 2, you can summon it from the graveyard onto the battlefield, even at instant speed. So, we can go ahead and use this card repeatedly on a turn to keep triggering Savra when it dies, to keep sacking to our draw cards, to keep sacking to all of our things. And because it's a creature and not a token, every time it dies, it will trigger our commander, which is super important. But because we're milling so many cards in our deck, we still need access to our lands we are throwing away, so we have Mending of Dominaria. Now, this is our second form of mill protection, true mill protection. We can play it and then get a creature from our graveyard after milling 2 cards, which of course triggers our commander. And then on the next turn, we do that again. And then on the final turn, we return all land cards from our graveyard to the battlefield and then shuffle our graveyard into our library. So all the lands we've thrown away during the course of the game come onto the battlefield now, and then we have a deck full of nothing but raw, good stuff cards. And we're not going to have dead draws for the rest of the game, basically, because Mending of Dominaria, it's going to get us there. God, this card is so good. And then finally, we have Bringer of the Last Gift, an 8-mana flying demon that says if it enters the battlefield, sack all other creatures that every player controls, and then reanimate all creatures that were in the graveyard prior to that sacking. Because we have a 54 creature deep deck, and all of our creature cards are really, really decent ones with good ETBs like Fleshbag Marauder, we will almost always come out on top here. Also, if we have a board with creatures on it already, I made a joke in my Savra video about what happens when Bringer of the Last Gift is activated while Savra is on the board. Let me go ahead and explain how this works. So if you have Savra on the board, or a Butcher of Malakir, or anything like that, Bringer of the Last Gift says sacrifice. When you sacrifice your creatures, Savra's triggers are all put on the stack, but because in Magic the Gathering, you cannot layer cards in between the effects of something that takes place in a single paragraph. This is why cards like Oblivion Ring, you can thread a blink into, but you can't thread something into Bringer of the Last Gift. Because you cannot thread anything into this paragraph, once all the creatures enter the battlefield with Bringer of the Last Gift, then cards like Savra trigger, making everybody choose creatures to sacrifice out of their new creatures that are now on the board. So, Bringer of the Last Gift, whether you cast it with Savra on the board, or you cast it with a bunch of cards like Fleshbag Marauder, Meteor Golem, and Demon's Disciple in the graveyard, either way, we should be the ones that end up on top when we cast Bringer of the Last Gift. Also, because he sacks all creatures, this can just end the game for us because of the cards we're going to talk about next. We have to talk about our Aristocrat section. So when you have an Aristocrat on the board, Bringer of the Last Gift, with the amount of tokens we have, might just end the game with something like Zulaport Cutthroat being on the board. Speaking of which, let's talk about the Aristocrats of the deck, beginning with, of course, Zulaport Cutthroat. Anytime another creature of ours dies or Zulaport Cutthroat dies, every opponent loses a life and we gain a life. Blood Artist says anytime any creature dies, target player loses a life and we gain a life. Vindictive Vampire is Zulaport Cutthroat again. Anytime another creature dies, Vindictive Vampire will deal 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. And then because of all the life gain we're doing with those, Dina Soul Steeper will read off of Savra and those. She can sacrifice creatures herself, and whenever we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. But these are not the big guys of the deck. These are not the cards that matter the most. The cards that matter the most are Sir Conrad and Dreadhound. Starting with Sir Conrad the Grim. Anytime another creature dies or a creature is put into the graveyard from anywhere, he will deal 1 damage to every opponent. He can also make every player mill a card with his effect. That triggers our Descending. That makes us Saprolings. That just... If he is on the board, we basically have the game in clutch. It is like Nico Robin grabbing your balls. Nothing will stop you from winning if you can keep a Sir Conrad on the board for at least a couple turns. And then we have Dreadhound. If it enters the battlefield, we mill 3 cards, of course. And if a creature dies or a creature is put into a graveyard from a library, every opponent loses 1 life. Think of the amount of dredge we have in the deck. Think of the amount of self-mill we have in the deck. Dreadhound is going to get us lots and lots of free damage off of that ability. And then, of course, we have another board wipe to trigger off of our Saprolings if we need it. The Deathbringer Regent is the sole solitary board wipe of the deck, not counting the Bringer of the Last Gift. Deathbringer Regent, when it ETBs, if you cast it from your hand, if there are 5 or more other creatures on the battlefield, which there will be, blow up all other creatures. If you have something like Zillipoor Cutthroat out or Blood Artist, then Deathbringer Regent will just win you the game the minute you cast it here. Not only will people be flush out of creatures, but you're dealing like 20 to 30 damage to everyone all at once, and there's not a damn thing they can do about it. But this is normally where I would talk about the land section and say, oh, here's the cards we're using to make sure the deck gets the colors that it needs. But no, we are playing Mycotyrant, which means our lands get to do triple duty. So normally, you're used to seeing in my decks, I've got this big fetching land section because these are great budget lands, right? Ash Barrens gets us a basic land to our hand. Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, Escape Tunnel, these are all the same card. They can get any basic land to our battlefield. Then we have Shire Terrace, Promising Vein, and Jund Panorama, which can get any of our deck's colors onto the battlefield. They're the same card. They are non-tapped lands normally that can become the land colors that we need. Then we have Myriad Landscape, which can ramp us while also giving us 2 lands of any one basic type. But not only do these cards descend when they activate their abilities, these cards descend when we activate their abilities. These are the cycling lands. They come into play tapped normally, but we are probably not going to be playing them that way. We are going to be cycling these to draw cards. They are lands when we need them to be, but they are oftentimes going to be just triggers of our commander. Desert of the Indomitable, Tranquil Thicket, Slippery Karst, Desert of the Glorified, Polluted Mire, and Barren Moor are all the same card with variations in their cost. Lands that tap for a single color, but then also allow us to just throw them to the graveyard from our hand, triggering our commander and getting cards. This, of course, leaves us with our dual lands, beginning with Command Tower and Exotic Orchard. Obviously, they're staples. Then we have Haunted Mire and Wooded Chasm. Even though they are tapped lands, they are forests, so we can get them with cards like Wood Elves. Then we have Tainted Wood, which says if we have a swamp, it can tap for green and black, otherwise it's colorless. And then Necroblossom Snarl, which comes into play untapped if we have a basic land we can show our opponents. Speaking of basics, we have 8 swamps and 7 forests, respectively. And that rounds out our Mycotyrant deck, a $31.91 deck, which of course about $1.50 of that is taken up by Mycotyrant, so still about a $30 deck. And we are very, very much firmly a permanence-only deck that is pushing very hard into that. Now, as for upgrades that I would do if I were pushing this deck a little bit further, honestly, our draw package is about where I would want it to be. I wouldn't make too many changes to it. And the dredge package, we've already got the best of all the dredge pieces here. As for Mill Protect, I would probably add in a couple of Eldrazi Titans. They are fun finishers in games, and they also will mill themselves and then give you a fresh reset of your deck, which can be super helpful to make sure that we have the long game covered. It also protects us from other mill strategies. As far as the ramp section is concerned, I would be lowering the mana curve of the ramp section by getting rid of things like Paradise Druid, Ornithopter of Paradise, and going up on cards like Elvish Mystic by putting in Finehorn Elves, Llanowar Elves, Birds of Paradise. All those cards, Delighted Halfling, would all go in here as replacements for those. I would keep Beanstalk Giant, Farhaven Elf, and Wood Elves, as they do get us lands from our deck. But I would also probably, I could see myself being talked into putting Font of Fertility and in here as well. I'd also put a Sakura Tribe Elder as a rampant growth that we have access to. That would be It's normally like $1. It's why I don't include it in a lot of decks, because it does tend to eat up a decent bit of the budget. As far as the reanimation and recursion package go, it's very hard to move very far away from these. These cards all do a very, very good job at what they are, and none of them are actually budget-minded cards. They just happen to be the cards that I would run in this slot. Anyway, as for removal and interaction, again, since we are limited to running our permanents, I would probably keep this area about exactly where it is. I don't really have any suggestions for the removal and interactions package that I would change all too terribly much. And then moving into the sack outlets, a huge upgrade for this deck would be to swap out cards like the Vampiric Rites and the Woe Strider for cards like Phyrexian and Ashnod's Altar, and Altar of Dementia would also do really, really well in the sack outlet section. Just having the ability to sack a creature and then mill yourself, triggering your commander that many times. And then if you are going that powerful, it would necessitate you putting in a Lightning Greaves and a Swiftfoot Boots into the deck, because if you didn't have a way to protect your commander from, you know, shenanigans happening to it, then it's just going to die. It is not going to survive our opponents looking at it and going, oh, that's a trampoly dude for 30-30 that does commander damage. Nobody's going to let that slide once they see Phyrexian and Ashnod and Altar of Dementia all touching the board. As for tutoring to grave, if we were not running permanents only, I would suggest Buried Alive, but as we are running a permanents only deck, you can't really move terribly much far from what we've already got on display here. But the land base is where I would probably make some upgrades. I would put in a Grim Backwoods into the land base. I would obviously add in fetch lands and shock lands. Fetch lands in general do a lot of work in this deck, considering what the Mycotyrant does. The cycling lands, if you have the money to pay for fetch lands, then I would probably just not run the cycling lands at all, because the fetch lands will smooth out our mana curve without giving us more dead lands in hand. I would also add in, God, it's hard to say that I would add in Bala Ged Recovery and Malakir Rebirth, because on the mill, they are not actually considered to be permanents. They are considered to be non-permanents while they are on the mill. So you make the discretion as to whether or not you consider them permanents, as they are permanents on one side. That is entirely on you. I would be 50-50 on them. But if I were saying to add them in, if I were saying that they were permanents as far as like in my brain, Malakir Rebirth and Bala Ged Recovery would 100% go in. Just flat out. Hagra Mauling as well for the same reason. But other than that, those are all the upgrades I would make to the deck if I were taking it outside of the budget, and that is my take on the Mycotyrant, a $30 budget build with only permanents as our deck building restriction, since we moved away from the $15 format for this video in particular. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. Let me know what upgrades you would make to the deck, what stuff you would enjoy running. You can also probably put in Alhammar's Archive. That would do a lot of work in this deck, all things considered. But even though that card was printed in a pre-con recently, it's still expensive as heck for some reason. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. If you've got any more deck suggestions, let me know as well. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.